Hey, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of House Calls, the podcast. This week, Ty and I get to talk to our friend, Jennifer Klepper. We are friends with Jennifer, but we are stuck with her husband, Brian. We can't get rid of him. Anyhow, Jennifer is actually the more exciting of the two. She's a novelist, an attorney, an entrepreneur, and a mom. And I'm sure a couple other things that I've missed. Her latest book is called The Last Road Trip. And I think it's a masterfully layered novel about the transformative power of friendship and the bad decisions that often get in the way. That's just my 2 cents. Ty and I are both big readers, but it was really cool to talk to Jennifer about this and understand the process of writing and getting it published. I've found those very cool, and just the behind the scenes stuff I really enjoyed. So I hope you enjoy the podcast. If you do, please subscribe. And my only spoiler about the book, no pictures. Enjoy.
Pros.
Hey, so welcome. Tonight we're talking to Jennifer Klepper, author of The Last Road Trip. Matt and I have known Jen forever. But you're the first author that we've ever interviewed or had a conversation with.
Sarah Corcoran.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And yes. Oh my gosh. But her book wasn't out yet when I talked to her.
That's true. That's true.
So basically one of the goals of our podcast is to talk to people who are doing interesting things. So some of them might be like young kids doing things, but we're also very interested in middle-aged people who are kind of recreating themselves. So putting out a book, and your second book is a big deal. And we want to hear, first of all, what were you doing before you became an author?
Wait, let's back it up. Let's really back it up. Wait, how do we know Jennifer? She is married to one of our bestest buddies. You probably know Brian Klepper. It's in the top 10 of all of our all-time best podcasts. He a doctor and a pickleball player, and just an all-around world traveler and thrill seeker, Dr. Brian Klepper. So that's how we know Jennifer Klepper.
So not to cut off Jen, but Brian recreated himself by paddleboarding and playing pickleball, right? Okay, he's a doctor, recreated himself. Jen was a lawyer, then did other stuff, and then recreated herself putting out books, doing startups, way bigger than playing pickleball.
100%. She's the most interesting Klepper I know, actually.
So maybe we should stop talking and let Jen tell us how she got to writing books. I just want to know, like, has this been a dream since she was a child? Wait. Would you please let her talk?
No, Ty, this is all about you and I and people that we know. We just want people to know that we know an author. We know people that are way smarter than we are and that are so bored with their lives that will actually hang out with us and just let us talk about them. But I got to take a sip of water. So, Jen, hurry up. Jump in there.
I was not an aspiring novelist as a kid. So I know there are writers and authors who had that dream. I did not, but I've always written, and I was always a massive reader. And I think that that's really kind of where it starts. You can't write a book if you don't read a lot of books. I mean, there's just no way around that. So I grew up a big reader, and as a lawyer, I wrote a ton. But of course, I was writing contracts and things like that. And probably the thing that I loved the most as writing as a lawyer was untangling knots or solving really tangled matters in a contract to make it work. And it turns out that's the thing that I love the most when I'm writing a novel, is when I find myself stuck and trying to figure out, how do I get the characters out of this mess, or how do I get from point A to point B? That piece of it is the one bit that I find analogous to writing as a lawyer. So
it's problem solving and how you get yourself out of it. I think that's fascinating because, you've always written. I mean, I remember back when you do movie reviews.
My God, I didn't know you knew that. I did that in Boston. I wrote movie reviews for.
I did. I might have left a couple comments as, Glenn from Glen Burnie. But anyhow, and that's one of the things I find fascinating is, Ty calls it recreating. I think it's not recreating because I've always known you've had that kind of, I'll call it outlet, that artistic outlet. And because I'm a deeper person than Ty, I can kind of see more things in people than that. But no, I just think it's fascinating that you put it out there, like with your storytelling and things like that.
How long before you wrote the first book, like the process, when did you start thinking, hey, I might write a novel someday? Was it always in the back of your mind, or was it kind of, you made the decision and boom, you started working on it?
For the first book, I think I always had this idea in my head of a story. And I literally one day woke up and thought, there must have been some crystallization. When your brain's just kind of working when you're not trying. And I decided to try starting to write this story. It did not end up being what I ended up writing, but it started me in the process of writing. And I think that's very, very typical as people start writing a novel and it goes a completely different direction, because if you've never written one before, you have no idea what you're doing and you learn a lot along the way. So that's how that one started. And it was such a great challenge and really an interesting new thing to do, that I, really went deep with that.
So was that the reason behind it? It was a challenge. It was something outside your comfort zone. And that's the reason you wanted to do it, as opposed to, I've always had this burning desire to write a book.
I think it wasn't that I always had a burning desire to write a book, but in that moment, I had a burning desire to write that book.
Got it. So the
second
idea,
book.
Shut up.
Sorry, this leads to so many questions, and now I got to share the conversation with you.
Mute. I got to get a mute button. No, but Jennifer, so as you said, it goes all these different directions. So does the idea come first, and then you're like, you know what, this idea is something that I can really build around to build a story? Or is that the kind of the real genesis of it?
Well, let me talk about the book, The Last Road Trip. And I'll also a little bit mention kind of how I'm going about the third book. So that one was a total concept. I had a concept and I was like, I have to write this. And with The Last Road Trip, where I knew the concept that I was starting with, and let me say what it is since we haven't mentioned it. But basically it's 5 old sorority sisters reunite to complete a cross-country road trip that fell apart in a horrible tragedy 20 years before. And when I came up with the idea of writing about this road trip, I started with the characters. I knew I had to have, and I decided 5 characters. I knew I had to have 5 characters. So I started with who are they and why the hell are they going on this road trip? So I started figuring out who each character was and why each one of them was going on this trip, both times. So the book that I'm getting ready that I'm working on now, I'm doing the same thing. I have the concept, which I'm not going to mention. But I'm starting with the characters. Who are each of the
losers in their basement that like to have podcasts?
I'm taking notes right
sorry.
now, and it's this little Wayne's World-ish happening as what I'm seeing here. But yeah, so I start with the characters.
So there's a period where the book comes to you and you feel it needs to be written. It's not something where you have a time where you're searching for an idea, because that was my original question. Like when you wrote the first book, was it like, let's see how this goes? Or did you have a plan to keep writing books once you realized you liked it? Or were you just dipping your toe into the water saying, let's see how I like this writing thing? Or do you kind of like just the idea comes to you and you need to write?
I don't plan that far ahead.
Okay.
So I was working on that book and I finished writing it and I was like, now what? And then it was figuring out, what do you do once you've written a first draft? Well, the answer is you rewrite it. And then you rewrite it again, and then it's a massive process. So I did learn all that with that book.
And then how did you learn that? I mean, do you have mentors who kind of guided you through that process?
In the writing community is really incredible. It's I always say it's the best thing that came out of writing that book is meeting this whole community of writers, and I consider the community itself a mentor because it's incredibly giving. It's a lot of rising tide lifts all boats. It's also, we're all in this together. I was able to be in multiple groups and the larger community to learn from everybody else, learn from people who were at the time going through the same thing. There's a lot of commiseration because there's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of pain, but also learning from folks who'd been through it, who were incredibly generous with their time. People got on phone calls with me that I didn't even know these people, but I would reach out to them and they would be glad to get on the phone with somebody who was new and give me advice on next steps, give me advice, learn from my mistakes. So the mentor was the community and individuals in the community.
So what kind of advice was it? Plot? Was it arc? What was it? Was it about, what kind of things are they, helping you along with? And how did you know you could trust, trust these people to give you the advice that works for you?
I think it's a matter of gathering it all and using judgment to find what works best for you, because everybody has an opinion, and a novel is art. So art is subjective, right? So it's really more about starting to feel comfortable with your output, but understanding that there are certain things that are pretty standard. And also, one thing that I learned really fast, I joined a writing group in Annapolis, and I went, and it was the first time I'd read anything in front of anybody that I'd written fiction wise. And I read it, and the first thing this guy said to me was, you can't start a book with a character waking up. And I was like, I didn't know this was a rule, but if you Google this, ways that you're not supposed to open a book, one of them is a character waking up. And that's a total cliche. And it was the first thing any other writer ever told me. So
Ty, write that down.
I will write that down. So when you you write it down, you sit, do you write chapters or how does that work? Do you send off chapters to friends, or do you kind of write the whole thing and then send off a rough draft? Do you bounce ideas off people? How does that work?
So my first book I pantsed, which is, there's plotters and there's pantsers. So pantsing is writing by the seat of your pants. So that is just like letting it go and letting it flow and just writing. Plotting is exactly what it sounds like. You create an outline and you have all of you know what's going to happen, and then you write your way from point to point. Things change when you plot. The last road trip, I was a plantser, I guess. I did a little bit of both.
Oh, wow. Because the ending is great. So I would have thought that you knew the ending and then you filled in everything in between. So that surprises me. So when you started that book, you did not know what was going to happen.
I didn't know all the twists and turns that were going to happen. I knew the characters. I knew why they were going on the trip. I didn't know exactly how things were going to turn out. And I allowed myself that because I wanted to have it happen a little bit, because the characters start to direct things as you're writing. But there was a point along the way where I had a really hard time with two things. One was Lisa. I could not write Lisa. She's sort of the main protagonist, if you will. I mean, every character has their own full story arc. And I talked to a friend of mine, another author, and she gave me two pieces of advice, because I told her the whole situation. Here's all the characters. Here's what's happening in the story. And she said, she posed a question to me. She said, is it possible that Lisa is the one who holds the story? Is it possible that she's the one who holds the key? And I'd never thought of it that way. And she does. And you've read the book. She holds the key. And that's not where it started. She did not know anything that anybody else didn't know. And when my friend mentioned that to me, I was like, oh. And so it made me really think about, what could Lisa know that changes everything? And the other thing she said to me was, you have to kill somebody. She said, somebody needs to die. And at that point, nobody was dying. And I said, well, I'm not going to kill any of the girls. So I had to come up with which other character was going to die.
So Matt hasn't finished the book yet. So Matt, she's joking. Nobody dies.
Okay,
you can read the book. Yeah. Can we mention my amazing self-control for not telling the ending of the book?
That was impressive. I literally was ready to hit the 7-second delay that we had to have because of you.
how about, I think we can talk about this without giving anything away. How about like research? So it's
Yeah.
5 women in our sorority. You were in a sorority. There's doctors and lawyers. You're a lawyer, you know, a doctor, you know, that kind of thing. They travel parts of the country, like the Grand Canyon you've been to California. You know, were there any things where you're like, I don't know anything about this? Like I need to talk about certain things
Yes,
that you had to research?
I did.
Did you have to do any research on people that eat like Ruffles and turkey sandwiches every day, or just Chick-fil-A? Is that hard to get that kind of
You
research?
know, to be fair, so again, for the audience who doesn't know the genesis of this story, I think it's worth mentioning that my husband and a few of his friends, including Ty, drove across the country and back. It was a 10-week trip, which is insane, in college or shortly out, or right after college. And they've celebrated this trip for years. And at one party at Matt, your place, I don't know if you'll remember this, but we were watching a video of the trip, and I said or thought at the moment, if it had been all women who did that trip, would they be standing here watching a video of it all these years later? Would they have been in each other's weddings? Would they have stayed friends? And then that was the night that this book was born. Like I literally said, I have to write that book. So I'm not sure where I started with that, but in terms of research, I did actually look at Brian's journals from that trip, but I ended up not using any of that stuff. It just didn't work. That was it. What your story was not my story. So I did do research though, because there is one of the characters, and this is not a spoiler. You find out really early in the book, but she has cancer, had breast cancer, and so I did talk to an author friend of mine who's a radiologist in breast cancer to talk to her about some things. I talked to another woman who's in medicine who has had breast cancer. And then just totally bad coincidence, when I was writing it, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer and went through all the treatments. So I did do a fair amount of research to try to make sure I was at least on the right, staying in the lanes for dealing with that subplot. There's an example of the research I did.
So what was interesting when I read it was because I had just read Sarah Corcoran's book, Grit and Grace, which we had mentioned, and that's autobiographical. So 80% of the people in the book, I knew exactly who they were. I was on a road trip like this, so there was a tendency, and I've already asked you about this, as I started reading it, I'm like, which one of these is thinking that it was like the male version of us? So you're kind of searching, and it's not the male version, but you still have a tendency to kind of search or be like, do I know this person or do I know that person, whether they were on the trip or not? And I started wondering, I'm like, when you're in your writing community where you know the authors, do you ever fall into that trap to be like, I wonder if she's talking about her dad, or I'm wondering if she's talking about her best friend? Like, do you ever fall into that trap where you like, fiction's fiction, don't worry about it?
I don't, because I've written books.
So
but
Jen, now you know the reason why I wanted you on this podcast. He was trying to figure out if there's anything about him in there, and if he could somehow piggyback off of this financially, somehow he could, make it, the social media presence that he has. He was really hoping to get something out of it. So we got to go now, but thanks. But as you said, it's art, right? And sure, everything is kind of based on your experience, but it's not 100% based on, somebody else's trip. It's your story. It's your vision of your characters. Yeah. And I guess is when you write these characters, you create these characters, and this is going to sound odd, but do you grow like there's a connection there with those characters for you? And it must be hard to kind of put the pen or stop typing and kind of putting those characters to bed.
That's very true for this book in particular. I loved these guys. I loved these women. I wish I could hang out with them. So I got to know them very well. And when I was done writing, I was done. Like, they're out of my life now.
Right.
Unless I write like a prequel or a middlequel, I don't know what that would be, because there's the 20 years before and then there's after, and which I will not. There will not be another book with these characters, but I did find that for sure.
Do you have a favorite character?
I don't
and then
know.
favorite friend of your husband's. All right, go character first.
I think I liked writing Mary Blake the most,
Okay.
probably because she's the least like me. So it was sort of fun to be that sort of always optimistic, always wanting to she's an extrovert. I'm not. I get drained by being in public environments. She soaks it all in, and that's how she filled her cup. So it was fun to write her. I've been dying to write, and maybe in my next book, I've been dying to write another character very much unlike me. I've been dying to write a character who does not care what other people think, and they just take without asking. And, that sort of complete opposite of Mary Blake, I guess, is a person who takes instead of gives. And so I do like writing characters who aren't like me.
So when you are writing, what's that process like? Are you like, hey, I'm going to block out 2 hours every day, the same 2 hours every day to write? Or as you said, you're a plotter or a pantser. How does that work into your life as a wife, mother, and other careers that you have going on as well?
I write best in the mornings, which makes it hard with a job. So weekends are best. But it's a little bit of a mix. It depends on what I'm doing. So, this being often a wellness podcast, if I'm plotting, if I'm really thinking through those, storylines, character arcs, plot tangles, I find walking is incredible for that. There's a whole lot of brain science around walking and creativity. And I think if you talk to a lot of authors, they'll talk about walking as a great way that they do this as well. So if you might see me out in the community walking and talking to my phone, because I'll be like, hey, Siri, send me an email. And I'll dictate an email to myself because I just solved a problem that I could not solve sitting at my desk. And all it takes is, literally getting 10 minutes out there on the trail, and my brain starts to release. I stop self-censoring, the blood flow is going, so the creativity comes out. There's a whole lot around that is absolutely real. So it depends on what stage I am in the writing, what I do, but that is a big part of it.
Will you ever dictate into your phone a full conversation, say between two characters, like literally just a couple pages of it, or is it more big concepts?
I've tried that. I've tried dictating what could be on the page, and it's never ended up working for me, but it is a great way just to get stuff out there. And in any case, a first draft is called the shitty first draft. So if I'm dictating it, that's the shitty first draft. And then I just need to edit it anyway.
So the idea sounds like coming up with a book idea sounds super fun. The writing it down seems cool. The rewriting it seems incredibly tedious and torturous, but it seems like that's where the book becomes successful or fails, is that rewrite. How do you get through that part, or is that not tedious for you?
The tedium happens a little bit later when you're going through the book more quickly over and over again, and you start hating it. You start thinking it's the worst thing that's ever been written. That's really hard, and that's usually towards the end. The going back into it after you've hit the end and starting over is really fabulous, because you're taking something that is in pretty shitty shape. Excuse, can I swear on this? Okay.
You can.
And
turn up.
You're gonna make it so much better on that go round. So it's really exciting to do that part, to go back in. And I know a lot of authors who will share that first draft with critique partners. I tend not to share at that early stage because I know it's so unfinished.
So, Jen, so you've gone through, you've done all this stuff, and then you have to figure out how to get it published.
Yeah.
How does that work in this day and age? And when you're doing all these rewrites, who suggests those? Is it the publisher? Is it your mentors, your community? Where does that idea come from? And how does that work?
Well, the great thing about today is there are numerous paths to publication, and they're all legit. And I think you find the one that works best for you. No matter which one you do, though, you have to get your work to an edited point before you can really proceed. And the editing can happen a couple of different ways. There's a lot of ways to do it yourself. So I'll do, a couple of rounds myself. And then you can use critique partners. So I know I have author friends who, will exchange manuscripts, give each other feedback, and that can be on a very macro scale. At this point, you're not copy editing. This is you have a plot hole, or this character feels very weak. Can you give her more, give her more chapters, more scenes, elevate her stakes, make her stronger in that way. That kind of a feedback. You can also hire outside editors. I know a lot of authors, even, big authors, will have editors at this stage that they'll hire. And then once it's fairly polished, then you can decide. You can try to find an agent, and that's typically a cold query situation where you're finding literary agents and emailing them, giving them your pitch, hoping that your pitch catches their attention and they think they can make money off of it, because that's what it's all about.
Sure.
There are some, and that's the only way to get into like a Penguin Random House or Simon and Schuster or HarperCollins, is to have a literary agent. But having a literary agent doesn't mean you're going to get picked up by one of those places, but it's the only way in. Another way is to go, there are smaller presses who agents will also submit to those smaller presses, but some of them will also take unagented author queries. And then there is self-publishing, which is now it's a lot easier. Typically, people do that through Amazon. There are other ways of self-publishing as well. So I know people who've done all of those routes, and I know people who've been successful in all of those routes, and I know people who've been not successful in all of those routes. So I think it's really cool that there's so many opportunities for that.
And how are you doing it?
I'm with a small press with both of my books so far.
Through an agent?
Not through an agent. But the way it works with my press is they provide all the editing. So basically, they acquired the rights to my book. So they provide editors that work with me. They do the book cover. They get the book set up for printing, and they handle all sales and et cetera. So I get a royalty from those sales. They handle getting the audiobook. I got an audiobook contract through them. The audiobook comes out in April.
Are you reading the audiobook, or is somebody else reading it?
No.
Who reads it?
It's cast by the audiobook company. So they have narrators. The one who's cast for this, she's an actor. And I heard a little bit of her audition for it, and she sounds great. So I'm looking forward.
You do different voices, like for Mary Blake's voice would be very different than Charlie's voice.
I think so. I did not hear anything with that, but that was my thought was, I hope she can do a Savannah accent.
So, and then with promoting, how do you decide how much you're willing to promote? Like how much of it is just hustle purely on your part, where you're like, you know what, I'm willing to do this, but I'm not willing to do that. Like maybe you're not willing to travel, or you're only willing to put so many days into it. Does that matter?
Yeah. So unless you have a really big book, and that means one of the big publishers is putting a lot of money behind it, authors typically have the bulk of marketing falls on the author, even if they're with a big press. It's just the way of the world anymore. So I think that like where I am now is I try to do things that are fun for me, and then things that are effective. And I am not averse to testing things. So like I put together some swag boxes because that was fun for me. And I have book influencers. I'm doing what's called a virtual book tour, where different book influencers are getting a copy of my book plus some book swag, and they'll post about it. They'll read and post reviews about it on their Instagrams or TikToks or wherever they are. And that was fun for me to put together went into those boxes. So, but there are other things that there's just, you can spend a ton of time on social media trying to promote your book. I don't have time for that. And I also don't know how effective that is. So I'm pretty targeted with it. And, I prefer to talk about the books that I'm reading than about my book. So I'm happy to post all the books that I read whenever I read them. But, being somebody who's out there constantly shilling my book it's just, I'm not really comfortable with it. And again, I'm not sure how effective that is, but I know it's effective for some people, but I don't have the right, I'm not a TikTok person. So for instance, I don't even know how to do that kind of thing.
That's shocking. I did
With
not
your
know that.
own with your own reading, are you reading mostly fiction, nonfiction, mixing it up? How's that work? And has that changed over your life?
It's changed. It's changed. I've gone through a lot of different phases. Growing up, of course, I read tons of like Stephen King, and I loved Isaac Asimov. And so I read a lot of fiction. And then I got into this big nonfiction phase after law school. I don't know why, but I read big giant books. I didn't have any money. So I think I kind of based it on value for the money. So if the longer the book, I felt like I was getting more value. So I was reading these massive books about like pre-World War I German warships, and books about the Spanish Inquisition. And I loved reading stuff like that. And then I finally sort of got out of that phase and started reading fiction when I got involved with a book club here, and back to fiction with a book club here in Sherwood.
Because Ty, you just finished, yours are Judy Blume and the Encyclopedia Brown books. Those were always the ones that got you through.
Love
Since this is a kind of a wellness podcast and we discuss wellness issues, I was just mentioning to Matt, the book I read before yours was historical. It's called The Frontiersman. And it's basically set in like 1770, around the time of the American Revolution. And by the frontier, they mean like Pittsburgh, like they're going out west, but it's like West Virginia, Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
It is a heavy book. It starts off really cool where he's out in the wilderness, but then it is heavy where, it's just getting killed by Indians. Then they kill the Indians and then torturing both sides. It is not a pleasant book. And I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, it was so much nicer reading Jen's book, and I was like, okay, I need to make sure when I'm reading that heavy stuff that I'm reading, and not that yours was light, but it was fiction, so it was definitely a nice change of pace.
I remember reading a couple of the Tom Clancy books were big. I remember reading those before I go to bed, and then waking up in the morning and turning on the news, wanting to know what was going on, thinking that there was a submarine off of the coast of Annapolis. Things of that.
You're a huge reader also. So Jen started reading when she was very young. Were you young when you started reading a lot?
I was. I used to steal my dad's Sports Illustrated, and I would read those, not just the swimsuit issue, but all of them, and would read those before he even got a hold of them. So yeah, I've always been a big reader.
What are you reading now, Matt?
Right now, what am I reading? Oh, I'm about to start yours. Yeah, we just got it. Yeah.
You're not in it.
No, I know. I didn't want to be. That's the reason I didn't go on that trip, because I knew someday there'd be a book about it. And I thought that would ruin my podcast career.
Oh, I have to show you this book I'm reading right now because it's really good. I think you might like it. If you like, this is nonfiction. So Blood in the Machine. It's really cool. It is about the Luddite rebellion against machine automation a long time ago in England. And it's kind of paralleling what's happening today with AI. And it's really interesting. It's getting into things about the morality of technology that takes away people's livelihoods, which is something that, I haven't really thought too deeply about, but it's incredibly well researched and it's brand new. So it resonates.
Interesting, because I literally, I was traveling last weekend and I was trying to get fiction or nonfiction, and I was about to buy the Lorne Michaels book because I'm a huge Saturday Night Live fan, and that's in console today actually, so I got to get that one as well. But like Ty said, I like to mix it up. I like biography, autobiography, a deep one, just to kind of like a pigeonhole or just into a head.
Matt, you're not going to ask me what I'm reading right now?
You just told me. You told me Pioneer. And then
No, I finished that one.
Crunch
Never
Years.
Okay.
finished Jen book.
Sorry. Speed Racer Part 5. Let's go.
So did you guys hear the story where first round of the playoffs, A.J. Brown, the wide receiver of the Philadelphia Eagles, was not
Yep.
having a very good game, and he was reading a book on the sideline, and there was some stuff where he was they thought it was a protest, like, I'm so bored with this game, I'm reading a book. And he very calmly stated in the press conference that he was reading a book called Inner Excellence by Jim Murphy, and it helps him focus during games. So I was like, I need to figure out what this book's about. And I bought it. I'm probably, 30% in, and it is amazing. I mean, it's obviously not fiction, but it is great. I would recommend it for anybody. Even you, Matt.
Book
Okay.
shot up to become a bestseller after that. And I guarantee you, every publicist out there was trying to figure out how to get a different book into the hands of some NFL player.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting because I think there's a lot of people out there who maybe in their teens and their 20s are not readers. And I'm hearing about more and more people. Like my daughter Emma is 26 and she is a huge reader, but she was not a huge reader growing up. Like, it is her favorite hobby is reading. She tries to read as much as she can. And I do think it's something that people, if they, know an author or something like this could inspire somebody that age group to be like, read Jen's book, not just because you like the book, but you'll build that habit and you'll start reading other books. You'll be like, oh, what else can I read? You'll go back and read the first book, you'll read the third book, but you'll read some other authors.
Yeah, I think it's such an important thing, reading. Getting these stories, getting into these other worlds, these other lives. It's just such an escape. And I think that screens have made it harder to have time to read, because it's easy to get distracted by your phone. And I typically read at night, and I find that problem myself, that the phone is a distractor, and you have to remember to put it down and just open a book and let yourself be focused on one thing.
So Jen, then when you're reading, are you reading, like, we just saw the book you are reading, but are you ever reading it on your iPad or your Kindle, or are you preferring to hold the actual book in your hand?
I have a Kindle. It's easier to read in bed with a Kindle, but I much prefer a paper book. I like the tactile aspect of it. I probably listen to more books than I read. Like,
do you do multiple books at a time, or do you have to always? Yeah, you have to finish. You can't. And do you finish every book?
No.
You get into books. Wow. Even though you're like, this is awful.
How long do you give it? Because I really struggle with that. If I have a great book, I'm really enjoying it. But if I have a bad book, I have a hard time giving up. I keep thinking, what if it's better? What if it has a great end? And then it's horrible. It's a horrible habit. I need to ditch it. So how far do you give it before you give up on it?
I don't have a set number. I know people who are like, I give it 50 pages. I give it 100 pages. I decide fairly quickly, usually. And typically my belief is it's not the right time. It's not the right time. Like, it's not the right book at the right time for me. It's not, because I don't necessarily think it's a bad book. I just think this is not the right book for me today to be reading. It's probably a better book for me to read in a year, or when I'm in a better mood, or what. And sometimes I'll stop listening to an audio because I don't care or I think this is a better book to read in print, or vice versa. So I don't have a set thing. It's really just a feeling. Do I want to keep reading it? If the answer is no, I'll just stop.
So Jen, that's interesting. There's Springsteen's book. I started reading it, and I was like, wow, I'd really, be interested to hear him read this book.
Yeah.
And then he did the audio book, and I ditched the real book for that, and I just got a lot more out of it for his voice. And that's the only time when I've really gotten a lot out of the audio book.
Memoirs, cool. I will always pick the audiobook over the print if they're read by the author, because so much out of that.
I also think it's interesting is when you read, there's a tendency if you're reading nonfiction to kind of think, oh, I'm learning something, and whereas fiction's entertainment. But I don't think that's always true. I think you can learn stuff from fiction. And even like in your book, there was something where somebody learned a new perspective. They had made an assumption and they learned a new perspective. And it definitely makes you pause and be like, huh, how many times do I do that in my life where I think I know this is how it is kind of thing. So it's just an example that I think you can learn a ton from fiction.
I had someone who read my last book who told me she never read fiction, and my book was one of the few novels she had read. And she said, I realize I need to read more of them because I don't feel like I have a lot of empathy, but I could get that from the book. I could see that reading fiction would allow me to be more empathetic, which I thought was really interesting. It was very insightful of her to recognize that within herself, that she was very sort of very set in how she approached things and didn't always think of the other people involved, and that fiction was an avenue for her to kind of expand in that way, because it allows you to enter another world. It has different characters of different dimensions, and it was just interesting. It's one of the more interesting bits of feedback I heard from a reader.
So, from a reader, that is interesting. So, Jen, tell me your favorite authors that you get look forward to today that are alive, and any that have passed away. Like someone's got a book coming out in like April. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe that Judy Blume is writing a new, Are You There, God? It's Me, Ty book.
Yeah, there's a couple books coming out that I'm really excited about. Frederick Bachman, if you guys have read Beartown, the Beartown series, oh my gosh, you need to read Beartown.
No, don't know that one.
You haven't read Beartown?
No.
Oh, I remember my mom mentioning that a couple of years ago. And it's like, you got to read it. And I totally forgot.
Yes, it is really good. It's sort of Scandinavian area hockey. It's incredible. I think I listened to all of the books in that series, and there's a ton of characters, and it's very complex, but and just the way he pulls everything back together is incredible. So anyway, he's coming out with a new book, not in that series. It's called My Friends. So I'm very much looking forward to that because I love everything he writes. And then another author, Amy Mason Doan, has a book coming out called California Dreamers, and I've liked all of her books. Hers are probably more like mine. She does a lot of her previous books have been sort of dual timeline, these sort of toxic secrets, interrupted relationships sort of books. And I've liked all of her books. So hers is coming out in, I think, June or July, somewhere around then.
You have a book that you remember was your first book that that's why I fell in love with the reading? Or that inspired me to write?
I know mine.
What was yours?
I read there's a Chuck Yeager book early on, that talked about, his stuff in the Rockets, and then Willie Nelson's autobiography way, way back. I mean, I think I was in like maybe early high school or something like that I was like, wow. I mean, I learned a lot about this guy's life, and I was like, that is really cool. And I wanted
was Chuck Yeager the right stuff? Or
yes, yeah,
okay,
it wasn't the right stuff. It was his book though.
But Chuck Yeager's was a major part of the right stuff
right,
also.
Correct,
okay.
Correct.
Okay.
So one that comes to mind, and again, I was reading from, I've got pictures of myself as practically a toddler falling asleep on books, but Fantastic Voyage. Did you ever read that by Isaac Asimov?
Which one is that? I think
that's the one where the people shrink down into the little thing, and they go inside the guy to get rid of the blood clot.
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It's that one time.
Yes, I read that so many times, and that's when I think that's probably why I wanted to become a doctor originally. I just ended up marrying one instead. It was a lot easier. But I loved that book. Oh my gosh. So that would be an early one that just really cemented it for me, I think.
I'm thinking Atticus Finch for me and Kill a Mockingbird. He was the coolest guy.
He was cool.
So to switch gears a little bit, you also have another job, right?
Yeah, I do.
So I think my quote would be from Dire Straits: Harry doesn't mind if he doesn't make the scene. He's got a daytime job. He's doing quite all right. So my point is, you do other stuff besides writing. Does that take the pressure off your writing? And also, what is your other job?
My other job is I am a co-founder, and I am head of operations for a company called Earlyworks. We are a technology product studio. So we create products and take them to market in various different spaces. So we have a fertility treatment management platform for clinics and for patients. We recently sold an ed tech product in the AI space. We have a game studio that has created card games and digital games. So we have AI, we're in health, we're in education, we're all kind of all over the place. It's really fascinating and interesting, but it's crazy. So it does make it harder to write, just because sometimes I just need my brain to relax, and writing is not really relaxing. But it's been a great challenge. It's been interesting. I work with the smartest people in the world, and it's been a really nice opportunity.
So how did you find that opportunity? Because you were a lawyer raising kids. How did that opportunity come about? And were you searching for it, or did it find you?
Everything has happened because of things that happened before. And I think none of what I've done in the past 20 years has been sought. It's just all happened because I took advantage of opportunities that came, built up new skills or made new connections, which led to the next opportunity. So I was a lawyer, and then I took some time off when I had kids, and I got really bored. And Brian, it was Brian's idea. He said, why don't you start volunteering? And so I did start volunteering. And of course, being a lawyer got me tapped to be all kinds of things. So I ended up being president of the PTO for like 4 years, some other things in the community. But then I started volunteering with kids, with a program with the kids that led me to get introduced to who my current co-founder is, where I started working with him. He hired me. I was the first employee at his last company. And that was a company in ed tech. And we were acquired by Google in 2018. And where it ended up was that Chris was the guy who hired me. He decided finally to leave Google, pulled together a group of us who had been at Google. He met some other folks at Google to form this new company. So it's just, it's just all these things sort of layered on top of each other, and just being open to something different, because every single thing I've done has been different from what I was doing before. Always uncomfortable, always.
What have there been other things where you had to say no? Where you're like, where you're like, that's a nice opportunity, but I'm writing a book, I'm doing this other stuff.
I went to her first for this podcast. I wanted to do Klepper calls.
I don't know. I think that most of my life, I didn't know how to say, I wasn't good at saying no when I was asked to do things. But in 2018, I had so many things happening. The book was coming out, we moved, and we were in the middle of selling the company to Google. And I was so caught up with that at work, because that's a very intense process. I just broke, basically. And it broke in a way where I decided, one, I'm going to have a year of no. So I had a year of no, where I just turned down everything, anything anybody asked me to do. I just said no. It was the best year. And I also decided there were some things that I decided things that don't matter, I'm not going to worry about anymore. And it took me a long time in life to get to that. But it was very freeing to say that, not that I was the best housekeeper in the world, but the house doesn't have to be in the best shape, or I don't have to make sure this is always done right away. There are some things that just never have to be done. I never really thought of things that way. So it is a little freeing, if a little nerve-wracking sometimes.
And you mentioned you have 2 kids. We should shout out that Will Klepper is a famous blogger.
Very famous.
Right.
Yes.
And I'm sure Audrey has read a ton and writes a ton also. But is she famous like Will?
She's not yet.
Not
Not
yet.
yet.
No,
Well, she is. She's my goddaughter.
that
She's
is.
famous for that.
Should we shout out Will's blog? How do people find Will's blog?
It is on Substack, and it is called "It's All About the Points." But yeah, if you Google Will Klepper, he should show up at the top of the search results. His blog.
Okay. What's his blog about?
He blogs. His blog is mostly I think of it as a pop culture blog. He has encyclopedic knowledge about movies and sports and TV and music, and this is really sad. He just came out with a new blog post where he recapped last year's movie watching, and he clocked 818 hours of movie TV watching last year. It's hard to say that.
Those are putting out some numbers.
That's
Those are
over
some
a
numbers.
month of time. So he writes a lot about movies, but he also writes, if you want to know what life is like for a guy in his young 20s or what the mind is like, it's pretty interesting. Some people only read the part where he talks about himself, and some people are more interested in the movie reviews. But he includes both, and he always, whenever he talks about a movie, he includes the percentage possibility that his dad will cry watching it, which it's a fan favorite.
Oh my God.
So Matt, do you have your big questions?
Well, I do. I've played golf with you many a time. Who's in your dream foursome?
Oh God. Well, obviously you two and Brian. I mean, there you go.
Wow. Okay. But if it had to be authors, living or dead, you had a golf foursome of golfers. Who are you playing with?
Oh, that's interesting.
Or it could be dinner. Like, so if you're worried somebody's going to slow you up and take forever putting,
it's my
it could be
question.
dinner.
That is a very hard question to answer on the fly. If you had sent that to me ahead of time, I could have been prepared.
Well, your PR publicist they never responded.
Could have a smart answer to that. I can't.
Ty, what do you got?
Mine?
What do you have for Jen?
What is your best book that you loved that when they made it into a movie, you also loved the movie?
Hey.
Ty's is The Notebook.
Was that a book or was that just a movie?
Whatever, dude. Nice cover.
I'd have to think about that because the problem is if I've read the book, I tend to not want to watch the film. And if I've seen the film, I tend not to want to read the book because I figure I'm going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
So it's pretty rare that I would have read the book and seen the film.
Ty, what are your thoughts on Vision Quest? It's 40 years old, the book versus the movie.
Vision Quest has one of the best scenes in all of movie history. It's a brief scene. It's the 6 minutes. It's not the 6 minutes. It's what happens in those 6 minutes. And it's basically the old guy who he works with. He's like an old waiter. And he just starts describing being in his hotel room by himself when Pele scores the goal upside down and backwards. And he basically starts crying. So it's like a guy, Matt, my age, crying because Pele, a human being, can lift himself upwards and backwards and kick a ball on a goal and take us all to a better place for just a moment. Isn't that what books and movies are supposed to be about? Just lifting everybody up?
They're supposed to entertain and they're supposed to move.
So this podcast thing, me and Matt being on a podcast, it's a vision quest. I just haven't told Matt it's a vision quest yet.
Oh, that's nice.
By Matthew Modine.
And then I wanted to cast the book. Who are your leads? But I had Blake Lively as Mary Blake, and now that all got thrown out the window. I don't think you can do that. I don't think the movie will sell.
She would not have been my pick. I mean, at all.
I'm thinking you need actresses who are can go that. You have to have somebody 30 to 40 so they can go old and go young, right?
Well, that's a good point. When I was writing the book, I had pictures of actresses just because I needed a visual of these, and they were not the only person I had the same picture was Kristen Chenoweth for Mary Blake.
Yeah.
And that was when I was writing, I had her in my mind. But I hear you on that. But we just started watching the TV show Disclaimer, the series, and there's a different actress playing the older one and the younger one, and it's maybe 20 years apart, and it's different, and it works.
Yeah.
So
We just saw, it's a German series. It's dark. And it's dubbed, but it's so good that you don't really notice the dubbing, but it's the same thing. They have multiple timelines. And immediately when the younger actor comes on, you know immediately who it is. Like, they did such a good job lining them up that it's not an issue at all. But I've actually never seen Blake Lively in any movie besides Deadpool and Wolverine, I think. So I was just joking that she could be Mary Blake. I have no idea. I just know she's in the news. What actresses did you use for the other characters?
they were more for visuals, I think, and they're also probably all a little too old at this point. I started writing this book in like 2018. So but I would say, Kristen Chenoweth was definitely on my mind, but it's probably like Reese Witherspoon would be another one for Mary Kate. I think, like I had, Julia Roberts was my Ansley visual. But like Rose Byrne would probably be a good Ansley as well. I think I had Jennifer Garner for Helen, but
Okay.
if I go back, I think like Michelle Williams would be a great pick.
Okay.
I had Robin White for Charlie, but
Okay.
the perfect Charlie would be the woman Rebecca Ferguson, who from Silo. She was also in Dune.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know who that
I
is.
saw Dune. Yeah.
I don't know if it was Dune 2 that she was in, but
Who did you say for Helen?
I think, well, my visual originally was Jennifer Garner, but I think Michelle Williams would probably be a really good fit.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was fun because Matt had no idea who we were talking about, so he's just over there,
Yeah,
not
just
being able
sitting
to
there.
say anything.
Yep.
Your other question?
When you write, are you writing in blue ink, black ink, or do you put it on the word processor or computer?
I type on my computer. I use Blackwing pencils. I always fiddle with them. I love my Blackwing pencils. I use every modality. I use note cards. I use blackboards. I'm wherever. I always have to be switching around because you never know what's going to trigger the thought. But typically, I free write on the computer. I edit with a pencil. I print it out and I hand edit.
Do you ever run ideas like over dinner with Brian?
I don't. I asked him some medical questions with this.
And he said, call Ty.
Right. Yeah. I had, I'm like, is this medication the right one for her to be taking? Or, I'll ask him questions like that.
You know what? How about a guy who likes to paddleboard up the Mississippi? Kind of do a little hucks in, deal with it. It's just an idea, something to think about. It's a gift from me to you. You can put that in there.
Thank you. I'll put that one in the hopper.
Were you saying all my book ideas, I can start giving them to you?
I don't want to
wake up every morning with a book idea.
Maybe you should write one. It's easy. Like literally all you have to do, you write a word and you write another word and you write another word.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Yeah. I'm still working on trying to get emails out in a timely fashion.
Don't you have a scribe?
Hey, Jen, I've had to edit some of his writings in the past, and a couple of things I'm like, you cannot hit send on this. Please do not hit send on this. This would ruin your career and our careers.
Save me. Yeah, but I tend to keep my opinions on that kind of stuff to myself. But he saved me. Yeah. But I've been doing more like the Will Klepper thing where I blogged a little bit. and some of those just stay on the computer and some of those go out.
That's smart. And I'm excited to see this book. I'm excited to get into it. I'm excited to see the next book. And I love that you were so open with us and tell us about the process and how it all happens. It's fascinating. And it's fascinating to see you go, as Ty was saying, through all these iterations. It's been fun to be on the sidelines to watch this.
Well,
it is exciting. I can't wait to see what the next book is.
I know, I'm excited about it. But
thanks for doing
guys.
this. Thank you.
This book would not exist without you guys. I mean, it wouldn't, period.
So would it be helpful if every time I see you, I ask, what's the progress of the next book? When's it coming out? And just keep harassing you? Or do I need to sit back and wait 5 years?
Let's hope it's not 5 years, but the book probably wouldn't be out if people weren't bugging the crap out of me so much, because I felt so bad. I just, for a very long time, I actually shelved this book. It was really hard to write, and I would put it aside. And so people were always asking, which is so nice. And it was great to have all that support. So let's make sure this next one doesn't take so long.
All right. We're going to book you for this time next year, and we'll talk about the next book.
Okay.
Use your pencil, write that down. Jen, you're the best. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, you.
Y'all.
Good night.
Good night. Good work.
So before Jen